But our speaker tonight is Sean Mathews. I had the pleasure of working with Sean Mathews when I was the CEO of MoveSnap. And Sean helped us establish what our brand, who were we, what was the image for MoveSnap, and what was the vision of where we wanted to go. He was very succinct, he was very clear, and frankly, he's an expert in this field. Sean has an extensive career in marketing and strategy, an extensive and successful career in marketing and strategy, both in Canada and international experience. And frankly, he's a trusted advisor that I turn to regularly. So even though we don't officially work together anymore, he's certainly a shoulder that I lean on and an excellent consultant that I would recommend to anybody and everybody. So Sean, gracefully and gratefully that he brought out his expertise tonight. He's going to walk us through some of the do's and don'ts of marketing. We're in a bit of a dip in the economy right now. Generally speaking, marketing is the first cut. So if you are running your own business, or if you're launching your own startup or your own fintech as an example, how do you invest? Where do you invest? What are the pitfalls to avoid? And Sean's going to walk us through all of that tonight. So I know all of you are very interested and eager to hear what Sean has to say. So I will step aside and pass it to the master himself. So welcome, Sean. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Hi guys, good evening everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. Before I introduce myself a little bit, I'll just talk about the topic that I want to delve into, which is lean marketing for startups. And when I talk about lean marketing, what does it mean? It means being a lot more strategic, putting strategy before tactics, being a lot more agile, sharp, and creative, especially in a time when money is scarce, right? For startups to begin with, money is already scarce. And then during this time, it's even worse. And so you need to get sharper, and that's the only thing that can help you get more effective with your strategy. Now, in the startup world, I often heard this term called scrappy. I'm sure everyone has heard that term, scrappy. And I totally applaud it. In the universe that we live, in that kind of an ecosystem, we need to be scrappy. But what I believe is that strategy is that thing that keeps the S screwed onto that word scrappy. If that S drops off, you know what it turns out to be, crappy. Okay? So I can't emphasize enough of the importance of strategy even before you get into tactics. I have a lot of conversation with founders where the first conversation is, how do we create an ad on Facebook? How do we go to market? That's the first question. It's never about stepping back and developing strategy, right? And I hope everyone in this room feels otherwise and you buy into the concept of how strategy is more important than tactics. So before I get into the real presentation, I'm just going to give you a little brief about myself. Close to 2 decades of experience in brand and marketing across 4 different countries. I've done it in Singapore, the Middle East. I'm originally from India, and now I'm in North America. So I'm basically spanning the whole globe, getting a great experience of all the different cultures and the insights that I've accumulated over the years. My last gig, I was working with RBCX, and I had the good fortune of growing, or not just authoring the strategy for 14 different ventures, but 3 of the ventures I was associated with from scratch, day one. And in 5 years, we really built those up to great brands. But I've also done the big brand kind of work, the Toyotas, Canon, Singapore Tourism, and all of that. And the only difference that I see between big brands and startups is that the big brands have a little bit more luxury of time, and they introduce a lot more rigor into the whole process because they have the time and the money to do it. But it doesn't mean that startups cannot invest their time in strategy, right? You don't have the big money, but there's other ways of how you can build your brand and go to market without busting the bank. Right? Sorry, I think I need 2 slides. Yeah, okay, this is my next slide. This one? Yeah, okay. So I always love to start with vision as a conversation. And this is a Japanese proverb that I really liked. It's very descriptive of some of the companies that we see out there. It says vision without action is daydreaming, and action without vision is a nightmare. So many of us may have had this experience of working with a company where you're constantly spinning and you're wondering why that's happening. It's probably because of a lack of vision, right? And both of these are not desirable because one, the first half of the sentence describes you not moving forward. The second one, you're moving really fast, but in the wrong direction, right? And so, how do you overcome that? While it's great to have an overview articulation of what your vision is, it's important that you break it down into tangible milestones. And that is my next template that I normally share with clients, where you can have this overarching vision, but then let's talk about how do you see yourself 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. You can also reduce that. In the startup world, you can also do it 1 year, 3 year, 5 years. Depending, some people have told me that, we don't know what's going to happen 5 years, 10 years down the line. That's fine, you can have smaller milestones. But it's very important for you to know what's that headline that you're going to achieve in that time frame. What are you going to stand for? What's your product going to look like? What's the measure of success? And finally, you can have financial KPIs as well. In the first year, you may not have a financial goal, but there's other ways of how you measure your success, right? And this is one template that ensures that you marry vision with action. And it's not just left there as a statement that you visit once in a couple of years and say, I'm not heading in the right direction. I'm not getting there. Sorry. The next slide. This one? Right. So beyond vision, I think one of the biggest issues that I've seen in many startups is, are they asking themselves the right questions? One of the first questions that I've asked my clients is, how are you different from your competition, right? And invariably I get a list of features, tangible stuff, but that's not the way consumers really think, right? They buy with their heart and then rationalize with their head. So to give you an example of a very tangible space where we found something that is a thinking that is driven by the head, but we converted that into a language and culture that's prevalent in the category. I'd like to give you the example of Dr. Bill, where when we started out, we were late entrants into the category, and we realized that medical practitioners suffer from inertia. They don't want to change their billing solution. And that's only because they don't know what's really going wrong. When we looked at competition, we realized that many of the competitors, they had faulty codes. When they submit the claims, those claims get rejected. And the practitioners can't be bothered to follow up with those claims, so they're actually losing money on the table, right? And what was good about Dr. Bill was that beyond having a great product, where all the codes are close to perfect, we also had a back end in terms of customer service that would get notified about any of those rejections, and they would follow up and make sure that the doctors are not losing money, right? And so when we found this tangible insight, but the way we positioned it is in a language that medical practitioners really understand, which is we reposition competition to say that in the world of generalists, right, Dr. Bill is the specialist. What we make sure is that you don't lose money because of all these tangible proofs. So the tangible proofs came later, but the language was in a way they understand depending on their category, right? So differentiation is key. The question is, how do you communicate that differentiation in a way that is defensible? The other question, I think, very important question, ask if you've got an ugly baby, right? It's not important if you go to consumers and ask them, is my product good? It doesn't matter. Ask them tough, open-ended questions in terms of what do they think is missing? What are we doing wrong? If they say that we've got an ugly baby, what would they do to make it pretty? Right? And sometimes it's not the problem with the baby. Sometimes it's a problem with the consumer, in the eyes of the beholder, we say, right? Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. And that's a good example would be the situation of right product, wrong customer. I tell you, after this example, you'll understand the relevance of the visual. But this is not a startup kind of an example, but way back when, it was a very relevant example to help understand this principle. So in America, way back when wallpapers were really taking off, that's a long time ago, there was an engineer and an innovator who came together. They decided to make an MVP, and they fused two sheets of plastic together, creating an air bubble between. And they went to consumers saying that this is the new wallpaper texture. What do you think about it? Guess what consumers probably told them? You've got a bloody ugly baby, right? But then these guys didn't give up. They asked themselves the right question, which is, where else can this product be very useful? And where do you think this product is now? It's in the packaging industry, the right consumer. So there's a good example of right product, wrong consumer, right? So I couldn't find a better example to emulate this, so I went back into history to find this. But I'm sure that we can find a similar example even in the startup environment today. The other questions, very important questions. I think when I work with clients and I ask them questions about the consumer's mindset, pain points, barriers, and motivators, what I get is a lot of product research that has been done, but I scarcely get the answer to these questions. Now, if you can't answer these questions, I think no matter what you do, no matter how much of marketing you do, you can't generate sales if you don't get this right. I found a very interesting tool that I use to be able to understand these motivators. It's called the personal pyramid. And the personal pyramid, it helps bridge the gap between, the tech startup founder's mindset versus bridging it to the consumer. So what I normally do is I start off with the product features, laddering it up to product benefits, then laddering it up to personal benefits. And you'll be able to find a differentiator when you reach somewhere up here. Now this is for Milo, one of the brands that we worked on, where the key motivator for parents was that it helps set my kids up for success in the future. Very bland. It's something that banking industry would probably do if they were running a fund or whatever. But we took this the next step further to ask about how you can creatively interpret this. And success in the future, we defined it as non-monetary. We defined it as the life that they want to live, and money being a means to the life that they want to live, right? So we talked about values. We said what Mido does is inculcate the right values so that they use money as the means to create the life that they want, right? And then all of a sudden you're talking about values like confidence and caring and social good, or whatever, wherever you want to take it. So I think there's a bit of a creative leap there as well, that when you get a motivator, you don't take it as face value, you take it to the next level. So I think once you've understood your consumer well enough, we do something called, identifying your core values, because it has to come from the consumer. At the end of the day, you're trying to connect with the consumer. You can't divorce your core value from the consumer. So what I typically do is a good exercise where you have the top 3 words that come to your mind about your brand. And then against each of those words, you start populating as many words that you've heard from the consumer. And what you think is associated with those 3 words. The top priority will be on the word that gets the most associations, right? So it could be one value, but it could be multiple values as well. Why is this important? Is because this governs the behavior of your organization in a manner that will resonate with your consumer group, right? So people normally come up with values and put it up there and they forget about it. It's very important for culture. It's also very important for resonating with your audiences, with your behavior. There's a big myth in startup marketing where they think that marketing is only for big brands. And we pay for marketing when we can afford it, right? I love to call this the Nike syndrome. And the way the script goes is that, hey, it's easy for Nike to create a big campaign. They've got endless amount of money. They're number 1 in the sporting category. I'm just a small brand. I can't really do that, right? And so you're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy that you'll never do marketing until you get the money, but you'll never get the money until you do marketing, right? And so I want to ask everyone in the room, have you ever heard of a company called Blue Ribbon Marketing? Blue Ribbon Sports, sorry. Blue Ribbon Sports, nobody? Blue Ribbon Sports. Don't give the answer. Don't give the answer. So Blue Ribbon Sports was a startup in a different time that didn't have big budgets. They didn't have, the fancy marketing dollars to go and, do a big splash. So what they did was, they gave their athletic footwear to students, college students, to play with it and give them feedback, right? And those college students turned out to be professional pros. And with that, the popularity of Blue Ribbon Sports grew. And now, what is Blue Ribbon Sports called? Nike, right? Now, it took Nike 20 years to get to where it was in those days, right? But when they started off, they were a startup, pretty much distributing free samples and hoping they'll get some mileage out of it. So, it doesn't matter where you start from. There's still a possibility that you can create brands and you can create very powerful brands, right? The reason why I'm talking about brands is because that's something that startups don't focus as much on, and they focus a lot more on acquisition. I can understand that. But you need to have a good balance between these two things, because one day you're going to become a big brand, right? So here's a nice quote from State Body, which says, in a crowded marketplace, fitting is failure. In a busy marketplace, not standing out is the same as being invisible. And why I'm saying this is because when we hire, let's say we are a tech company and we are hiring a product development person, what kind of a person would you hire? Would you hire the best, or you would hire a junior? Who would you hire? Anyone? Hire the best, right? Product development, very important. Unfortunately, when it comes to marketing, the same companies hire very junior people and expect miracles out of that junior person, right? This is a personal experience where I met a client and I was talking about how they should work on strategy, and the client was also excited because they recently hired a growth marketer, and not a very senior growth marketer, but a growth marketer. And he was super excited that in the next 6 months he's going to see some real great acquisitions, right? Fortunately, I met the client 6 months later, or even after that, right? It was not exactly 6 months, but we did bump into each other. And I asked him, how's things going? And he said that he had to let go of his growth marketer because they didn't achieve the acquisition targets. And again, I started the conversation about how strategy is important before you get into growth. And it still didn't get it. So I think there are camps of people who understand strategy. I've had enough conversations with people who understand the importance of strategy, and the others will keep doing what they do, right? But I'm on a mission to let people know that the moment you adopt strategy, it's a far more powerful tool than just running tactics. Sorry. Okay. So throughout the presentation, I keep giving you a little bit of templates and tools that you can use yourself. I'm sure after this workshop, we'll send this over to you. In case you want to play around with those tools, you can do that. And one of them is crafting your own value proposition, right? Like even before you start crafting your value proposition, you need to have these 3 components articulated with you. One is, who are we for? The target audience that faces a particular problem. How are we different? How do we solve the same problem differently? And what is the end benefit to the consumer, which is obviously linked to our differentiation, right? When you have these 3 components, it's very easy for you to say that we are the only ones who help this consumer achieve this from a benefit perspective, right? So value props, super important. Spend time in crafting them because they can make a world of difference. Now coming to brand, a lot of it is also brand that I talked about previously, but this is one misconception that I found quite a lot, where the word branding is interchanged with brand, right? And brand is more than just branding. It's about the perception you create in the minds of the people, but it's also something that the glue that holds the entire organization together and puts it, it's a promise you make and you deliver it through your actions, right? So it's not just a visual identity, which many people mistake it for, right? I love this next book that was written by Simon Sinek. I don't know how many of you have come across this, but it's the concept. He says, you start with the whys. Has anyone read this book? Right. So the why is the purpose of why you exist, right? In the case of Mido that I talked about earlier, the purpose was to help the next generation live the life that they want or craft the life that they want using money as a medium. right? That's a very different purpose from saying, I just want to make the next generation literate about money, which is one talks about materialism, the other one talks about values, right? Likewise, in the case of Nike, it's about making sure that they create, inspire and innovate with athletic footwear. But the purpose is articulated as, if you have a body, you can be an athlete, right? So starting with the why gives you that real top level purpose, followed by, when you come to how, it's the differentiator. We talked about the differentiator earlier, so I'm not going to dive into that, but it's how do you deliver that, and then what do you deliver is the tangible aspects of things. That's when you start talking about features or offerings that you have which are unique, right? Still got to be unique, but it's more tangible in that sense. There's another book which I think is very interesting, Think, Do, Say, because that helps you understand how to bring a brand alive, right? Which is about how you want them to think about your purpose, what are the actions that you perform in order to help people understand and what your brand is all about, which is the culture, and then communications. How do you communicate your brand so that it's all aligned? So, emphasizing the importance of brand. Without a narrative, even your communication that you put out there cannot be as effective as it can be, right? A lovely narrative that I love to talk about is the hero-villain narrative, right? Every narrative has got to have the story arc where there's a hero and there's a villain. It's a very age-old thing that has been followed quite a bit in the CPG industry, and they have done it with very effective. The moment, it's like the school of P&G or Unilever's. You'll see all their ads pretty much have the same kind of formula, only because it's very effective. Right? Without a villain, they can't be a hero. Right? So you need to have a problem that you're solving for in order to dramatize how great you are. Right? Example, Dove. The enemy is harsher chemical kind of substitutes that's available in the market. And I can go on with Tide against bargain cleaners. Bargain cleaners can't get to the level at which Tide gets. And it's competitive. You see most of the ads are like that, right? And Nivea again. Here the enemy or the villain is those stains, right? They're not. So your villain doesn't have to be your competition. It can be a concept. It can be a philosophy that you stand by, right? The benefit of doing that is you're able to dramatize how great your product is and give consumers a very clear understanding of why they should buy you and not competition. So all these things normally sum up into a nice thing. One more thing I'd love to talk to you about is positioning, and then promise I'll get to a summary kind of a thing, which is the marketing blueprint, which will bring everything nicely together. Right? So positioning is about finding a space that's, you've got three things that you need to look at. One is the consumer insight and what's the relevance, the competitive space and where's the gap, right? And finally, your brand credibility. Can you credibly deliver to the consumer insight that you're looking at on the other side? When you find this sweet spot here, that's where you position your brand, right? It can be a price differentiator, it could be a product differentiator, whatever be it. But it has to be something that you can credibly deliver and it resonates with the consumer. And finally, to sum this all up, what I love to do is come up with a marketing blueprint. Everything's empty here because I can't show you any client work. But basically what I do is I come up with your target audience persona name, your insight for the target audience. You've got your purpose. Next is your value props, which we've talked about. And then the reasons to believe, which is the next level of rational benefits that you offer your consumer. So to make sure that once you've attacked the heart, you're resonating with the mind as well, right? And then your values, which we talked about. And finally, you need to have the objectives and KPIs that you're working towards for the year. Right. Once you have this, everything else becomes very simple. You can keep going back to this and referring, are you aligned with your brand, with your marketing plan, and you can never stray off from something like this. So the next thing I'd like to say for startups who don't have a lot of money, the first thing to do is obviously look at your own channels. I like to say that your own channels is the window through which you say hello to the world. Make sure that it's your best hello, right? When you do your website, it's not about talking about yourself, but about the person's life and the person who you're trying to attract, how you're going to benefit them, right? The next channel that you can actually think about, everybody knows this, but social media, it's not that you're supposed to be on every channel that's out there. You've got to look at what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to build a community? Then it'll be Facebook. Is it also aligned with the audience that you're trying to connect with? If you're more in the educational space, then it's YouTube, right? Because you need to educate people. Video is the best way to do it. Instagram, if you're more in the creative flair, pictures is your way of storytelling. Likewise, if you're addressing the professional audience and you want to bring out thought leadership, it'll be LinkedIn, and so on, right? So you need to evaluate why do you need to be on that channel. And honestly, I say less is more. Don't spread yourself too thin. Take channel by channel and build, right? Start with 2 channels and build from there. Don't try to be to do everything at one go. It's a recipe for disaster, right? And when you look at social, I have a tool which is very useful in coming up with your content for social. I call it the story map. And basically think of this as writing a book, where the theme is nothing but the cover of your book, which is what your audiences will get to know you for as a result of reading through all the chapters, right? The next part is the chapters, which is, are there 12, 13, 14 chapters? I don't know, you could have 50 chapters, but you need to have some good headings which will give you enough content for you to talk about below each chapter. Then the tone of voice, that goes back to your brand, but in order to differentiate yourself, you need to have a distinct tone of voice and a consistent tone of voice so that people recognize you the moment you put up something there, right? And then the communities. Which are the communities that you can actually get engaged in order to amplify your message? If you're a brand talking to on baby products, then moms are the best ones that you should be reaching out. There are tons of moms communities out there. How do you participate with them? How do you engage them? How do you use them to amplify your cause? And now that we've talked a lot about strategy, I want to talk about the priorities from a tactical perspective for startups 0 to 1. Basically, there's a lot of text on the slide, but I'll send this over to you guys so that you can use this as a reference. Basically, this is build the foundation kind of phase, right? Where from a marketing perspective, you need to do research, a lot more research. I think startups don't invest enough in research because it's expensive, but you can do it on your own, right? Try to understand those early positive signals of marketing traction. Try to understand the 3 C's of your business, which is consumer, cost, competition. I would say I'd add another C, which is understanding the culture in which you operate, right? And the next thing is actually building up the fundamental marketing channels, like your website, your lead capture mechanism, your tracking for analytics, email marketing. You can choose a service provider based on how, whether you're thinking about today or for the future. I think there are some good tools like MailChimp that you could start with, but HubSpot is a good option. Salesforce obviously is for enterprise, so I wouldn't recommend it for startups. But I've seen startups who use modules from Salesforce, right? The next thing is to begin your messaging test across different channels, which is paid, content, social, email, and SEO. I would say that I'm a big believer of doing a lot of content because I've seen a lot of our ventures at RBC succeeded during COVID, or the ones that succeeded during COVID were the ones who invested a lot in content and social before COVID, right? So an example is Arrive. Arrive started with a big push. I don't know if much of you know about Arrive. It's a platform to help newcomers settle in Canada. So they started off with a lot of content, and even before COVID. So when COVID came around and everyone was forced to shut off their advertising, Arrive shut off their advertising as well, but they were getting 70,000 monthly visitors to their website every month because of the content that they had done in the past. You see? So that's one cost-effective way you're investing your time in creating content. And again, many people say, oh, it's easy these days with AI, you can churn out a lot of content. but that's content that is not differentiated in a way. You're writing content for humans, right? So you need to have a good mix of the SEO kind of content versus the brand kind of content. And I would say invest a bit of time in creating your narrative through brand kind of content. And finally, set up your partnership ecosystem, right? Like, who are the partners that you can leverage in order to build your outreach? And so I would say the priority marketing channels would be obviously your paid media if you've got the budget, but if not, focus on content marketing to a greater level, email marketing, social marketing, and then SEO is absolutely essential if you're doing content anyway, right? And then in terms of KPIs, it's about the target user that you've reached, your cost of reach, your engagement rate, cost of engagement. Those are the kind of things you're trying to figure out because that would be the base to prove that you actually have a clear funnel, you have a product and brand that people are actually resonating with, and that would build your base for the next level, right? So I know that there was quite a bit that we talked about. I'm always happy to take questions even after the session. Like if you think of something, you can email me and ask me. And I'm always excited to answer any marketing question. So this is all I have for you guys today. And hopefully this was useful. And if you have any requirements where you need some help, I'm always a call away. I can give you my number.
Any questions for right now? We're going to do a panel in a minute. So any questions on the slides?
Yeah.
Thanks, Sean, for the method presentation. Very. Thank you for the method presentation. It's very enlightening and inspiring, actually. My question is the following: have you seen through your experience as RBX lead or support on, let's say, the marketing domain? Have you seen startups that don't go through because they think the marketing budget is out of whack or out of budget, out of control? So, I deal with venture studio and venture building, and sometimes I see a concept that requires tons of marketing as opposed to MVP. The ratio doesn't fit. Just forget it.
Yeah,
It's something that you actually see.
And I think it's, a startup in ventures used to be evaluated from so many different parameters. And I think, Tanya, you could speak to this as well. It's never a case where you go and present a marketing budget that's out of whack and they kill your venture, right? Because they've already prescribed how you're going to present to the committee, right? So every venture that we start up, there's a sound rationale as to why that venture exists. And their budgets are very different, right? If we feel that a B2C venture needs a higher budget, they would definitely let them have it. For example, Mido's budget was probably one of the highest amongst all other ventures in marketing.
As a ratio, percentage.
Percentage, Tanya?
Seed funding.
Percentage of funding?
Of seed funding, let's say. Round A or C funding.
Mine was probably 50%.
Sorry?
Mine was probably 50%.
50% was the marketing budget, yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah, but that's because it's a B2C and you need to pump in that kind of money, right? If you're dealing with another B2B, like let's say Dr. Bill. Dr. Bill is targeting medical practitioners and you don't have those kind, they do have a decent budget, but it's not as high as Mido.
Yeah. Can I borrow your mic first? I'll just add a bit of flavor. Just borrowing this one so everyone online can hear too. Sean is spot on. So it's really not about how much you spend on marketing. It's when you spend on marketing and who your audience is that you're spending marketing on. So as an example, Mido had a higher budget. We were B2C and there was product market fit, already established product market fit. My former venture, we waited until we knew we had product market fit before we did the marketing spend. And so the marketing spend was significantly less. We focused on brand content more so than getting the name out there because we needed to make sure it resonated and we were drawing in the users. But we very carefully in both ventures track the funnels from top to bottom, right? So if you have any leakage or drop-off points, then there's no point spending before you know that it's driving the right consumers. So you may have a great product, but if it's the wrong audience, it's
But again, Tanya, to add to that, like the funnel differs from category to category as well. And in the case of Mido, the reason why you would see a lot of drop off is because there were so many steps before a person actually registers as a user, right? Like the parents have got to first register, then they've got to add a card, then they've got to invite their kid, and the kid has got to be connected, then they got to transfer money. Crazy funnel. So there's bound to be like a 80% drop off. So then you've got to feed the funnel with a larger number of people, and hence you need higher marketing dollars there.
If there's no other question, may I ask this?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, my second question is pertaining to startups that operate in stealth, bootstrap and stealth. So I like your proverb you use actually, if you have an ugly child, just ask. It's very interesting, but nonetheless, sometimes you cannot really ask too much, because if you do, you'll break the stealth mode and you'll be at risk of, I mean, keep in mind, many bootstrap startups don't really have big budgets, so they have one shot of getting from -1 to 0 fast before actually the concept is out, and probably people with, investors with deeper pockets will just move on. So how would you go about doing some marketing research as a basic, let's say, sanity check before jumping or diving in?
Yeah, we would. Even in even though we were backed by a lot of by RBC and many of our ventures didn't have the money to invest in big research, right? So we would rely on our existing users as one base, and then we try to find non-users as a smaller base on our own. But we would do the research ourselves, right? So when you're bootstrapped, you just got to roll up your sleeves and get it done, right? I've seen the founders going out and talking to people.
And the stealth part.
Yeah.
Not just the bootstrap part, the stealth part. Being, like undercover and not.
Yeah, but is the reason that you're in stealth mode because you want to prove your product, right?
You want to avoid being, the first dumb mover, the first mover advantage to become a disadvantage.
Yeah, but at the same time, I'm assuming that you're testing your product, and that's the reason why you need to be in stealth mode, right? Yes. In which case, I'm not going to tell you to go out and do a big burst, because that's not your objective, right? If you're bootstrapped and you want to be in stealth mode, then when you're ready for marketing, that's when you should start. Until then, you're trying out product market fit, right? Trying to acquire small bases of consumers, getting their feedback about the product, and refining the product until you're ready. So that's a business objective. And marketing cannot go against the business objective.
Thank you.